Welcome everybody to the Fixx Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, Jim Rogers. I want to bring on right now the returning Andy O. Andy,
What's going on, guys?
what's going on, brother?
Oh, another busy, lovely Monday as usual.
Well, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to let you know that we have a special guest we're doing an interview with today. If I were to bring up the name Koloff, Ivan or Nikita Koloff, would you know who I'm talking about? Well, we've got actually this guy. Welcome to the show, Tyson, also known as Aleksadr. I apologize.
Thank you, guys. I'm glad to be here.
Now, before we get started, I wanted to do a quick rundown of something. Four-time WrestleMania heavyweight champion, Laredo Pro champion, NWA North American champion. That's a big one. NWA Southern Tag Champion, NWA Georgia Champion, NWA Atlantic Champion, and also PWA Heritage Champion. Plus, you've held some tag team gold, and wow, it's the only thing I can say is just absolutely wow. How did you get into the wrestling business?
Well, I'd grown up as a fan growing up in the Georgia area, and I had boxed and done some amateur wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission wrestling, and ran into a guy that I played ball with growing up, and he was running a wrestling promotion in Atlanta, and it started just kind of as a thing for a football team I was coaching, and I did a show and then sought out actual training and went through that and got in, and just I fell in love with it as a kid and then kept it going from there.
Well, who was you trained by? Because it's not out there. Is it somebody you want to not disclose or prefer not to disclose?
No. I'm proud of who trained me. A guy named Crew Jones.
Oh, man, I know Crew.
Yeah. So, he trained me, and it was funny that, like, a lot of the stuff I did early on, people kind of related as, kind of like a knockoff of him, but it was, we've just in real life, we've got, like, really similar personalities, and the way we joke around and everything, we're very similar, and so I kind of, took on a lot of the characteristics that he had. And then, Rick Michaels helped me out a good bit. And then I always credit with, like, the polishing stage of it to be Luke Gallows. Whenever we were working together in the Good Brothers Dojo, he really helped me to, kind of refine the edges that I still had on me.
Now I saw a couple of your matches. One from the newer Continental, not the old school Continental, but the newer Continental. I've also saw you in Hope Championship Wrestling and Championship Wrestling from Memphis, I believe it was.
Atlanta.
Oh, Atlanta. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, I know of Dave Marquez. Was he involved in the Atlanta?
Yes. Yeah, Dave owns and operates all of the the name slips me. It's United Wrestling Promotions, but they're all under the Championship Wrestling umbrella. I want to say at the time he had Championship Wrestling from Atlanta, Memphis, Arizona, Hollywood, and it seems like he was going to start one other one.
Oh, okay. All right. Now, I've got to ask, how did the name, how did the change from the artist formerly known as Tyson Dean to Alexander, how did that occur?
Well, I'd been doing Tyson Dean for quite a while, and an opportunity came about where my, let me say, former tag team partner, we had known each other and been on shows and everything together, and he called me and asked if the opportunity was right, what I thought of making a change. And I said, it depends on what the opportunity is. And so he presented that there was with Nikita Koloff to start a tag team. And I grew up watching Nikita and Ivan and as a kid and everything. And so, I jumped at the opportunity. And then even with that, though, it wasn't like a slam dunk. It wasn't just, okay, so you agreed and you're going to be a part of this tag team. You're going to, take on the Koloff name. There was like a feeling out process and a testing phase to see if, was the kind of guy that Nikita wanted to put his name behind. And,
Right.
Through that, talking with him and showing him matches and then showing him, what I could do in the ring and everything, that I was gifted the honor of accepting that name.
That's awesome. So you're continuing on the Koloff legacy.
Yeah, with a lot of pride.
I don't blame you, not one bit. And I know you're still a heel, but that's fine. Andy, do you got any questions for him?
So, out of all of the circuits that you've worked in, which one have you enjoyed the most?
Oh gosh,
It's always a learning experience and different, vibes. Whether you're in NWA or you go to these different territories, but
right.
Based on the
man.
people you work with,
they're all special in their own each individual way. Wrestle America is a place that's got a special spot in my heart because it's close to home. And then Hope Championship Wrestling, I currently hold their championship. That's been close to heart for me because it's a ministry. It's something that that I've really liked the outreach of it. I've enjoyed the people that I've worked with. Those two in particular right now are really special to me.
Now, have you worked with anybody, let's just say like anybody from like the mainstream, like other than like Luke Gallows, obviously?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Have you worked with anybody who's now seen on like the bigger circuits like WWE or NXT or AEW?
Yeah, I've had, I don't want to name drop, but yeah, it's, I've had matches with Austin Theory, Matt Hardy, EC3, Gunner, Rick Steiner, crap. When we had the school, a lot of the guys there said I should write this stuff down so I would remember it because they would remind me of ones I've forgotten. Gangrel, Rob Conway. Anyway, yeah, it's a pretty good list.
Everywhere from new to old school, it looks like.
Yeah. It's been pretty cool. I mean, I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities to be in the ring with people that I would consider to be, the best in the world at what they do. And one of the biggest compliments that I ever got was getting out of the ring after one of those matches. And the guy that was the booker there told me, he said, the greatest thing about what he always appreciated about me was it didn't look like the guy that was supposed to be the star against the guy that was, always there, that it was two stars in the ring together. And I've always taken that to heart, that like, I didn't want it to be to where if someone bought a ticket just for that night, that they saw, whoever against me, that it was two guys that deserved that spot and that were in there together working with one another.
Now, I noticed watching your matches that you use a move almost similar to I'm going to butcher this name, Kazuchika Okada's Rainmaker. It's a short arm clothesline. Is that or would you prefer the short arm sickle?
Yeah, I mean, I call it like a ripcord sickle. It was, that was my way of, Nikita obviously has height and weight on me. He was, I want to say around 6'2" and 280. And I'm, just under 6 foot and, between 215 to 220. So I've got to get a little more momentum into it. So that, and just to bring it to more of a current version, I've always used that as my finish, and to pay homage to what he did.
And that leads me into my next question: Have you made that trip to Japan yet?
Oh, I've not. That's a bucket list.
Well, I'd like to see you go over there.
You and I both.
A friend of mine who's actually been on the show, Cyrus, the
Destroyer. Yeah. I've worked with him several times.
Yeah, he came back from All Japan.
He's doing well over there.
Yeah, he's doing really well.
Yeah.
He messaged me while he was over there at the time. So, yeah.
Man, I mean, I always figured he would catch on once he got there because he looks so much like Vader.
He does, but he believe it or not, I was in a grocery store and he was in the same aisle I was, and I was like, "What's up, Cyrus? How are you doing?" And he knew exactly who I was from the get-go.
He's a good guy. Man, like a sidebar, the first time I ever worked with him, he's a large guy. He gets in the ring and he's, kind of like pacing around and everything. He kicks the bottom turnbuckle and the whole ring rope breaks off. And so then like later on, I'm down and he's setting up for the Vader bomb, and all I can hear, rings are always making noise, but the turnbuckle was creaking as he's bouncing on it. And in my head, I couldn't get it out of my head that, like, if you don't move, this ring rope's going to break. Another ring rope is going to break. This huge guy is going to land on your head and squish it, and you're done.
Well, let me ask you now. You worked for the newer version of Continental. What was it like working for the Fullers?
Oh, it was great. So actually, Dennis Gale owned it.
Okay.
Yeah, he had bought it and everything, bought the namesake and everything from the Fullers. They were still involved, though. It was awesome because, I got an opportunity to watch some of those guys whenever I was younger. And, a lot of them were there. So, like, to draw that old Continental crowd into whenever we would do the shows and everything in Alabama and around that area in Dothan for the Continental crowds, it was really cool because you would draw a lot of the people that had spent their time watching the Fullers and Wendell Cooley and all those kind of guys, Frankie Lancaster, Bullet Bob Armstrong, all those people, and to get to perform in front of them and entertain them and then sit with those guys and hear their stories and share stories with them. It was really a cool experience.
Do you got any stories from the road?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, one of the funniest ones I always think is like, there was a promotion with the NWA. It was NWA Saw that was like around Nashville, and the lady that was the promoter for NWA Atlanta would drive myself and another guy up there. And so we had done a show. We had done a show at Saw, that was in Nashville, and we were going to NWA Mid-South, and that was in Dyersburg, so it was out towards Memphis. And we got pulled over because she had not turned the headlights on. She just had the running lights on the car. And the police officer asked her to step out of the car and go to the back of the car, which was odd because, I mean, she was a very petite lady. And he kept her at the back of the car for like 40 minutes. And so she finally gets back in and she thanks him and everything. And so she just starts laughing. And I was sitting in the passenger seat and I'm like, well, what's funny about this? And she goes, he's not been questioning me. He's been questioning you guys. And so he had her out there because he believed that we had kidnapped her and that she was covering for us because she was afraid for her safety if she didn't tell that we had kidnapped her. And so he had her outside the car trying to convince her to admit to this kidnapping that hadn't taken place because she didn't look like she fit in with us.
Oh, man.
Profiling.
So, yeah. It was a pucker up moment.
Andy, you got anything?
So,
like to...
with everywhere so far that you've been, do you see yourself in the future ever being with maybe WWE or AEW? Did you ever take it if you got the chance?
Yeah, I mean, you always want to jump at that opportunity. I've not done anything with AEW. I've done some small things with WWE in the past. Also consider it, at my age, I don't know that I really want to drop that. But I look at it kind of like the NFL drafting running backs. They're not going to come in unless there's something just extraordinary about them. They're not going to come in and draft a running back that has some miles on it.
Probably in the 70s when you retired, technically. So,
Well, yeah, but he was in his 20s when he built that name.
Yeah, that's true.
Hey, now Mike Jackson is still running strong.
That dude's ageless.
Action Mike Jackson.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Mick Foley. He should have been in a wheelchair like 15, 20 years ago.
I think Mick Foley and like Jeff Hardy are aliens. That's the only reason why they're still walking.
There was a rumor going around I read about not that long ago that fall he took at the Hell in a Cell was actually set up that way. That like somebody's head. I guess he came out and told everybody that there was actually padding under the announcer's table, and they had practiced that before the pay-per-view. Apparently, I don't know how true
I don't know. I've never heard that one. I can't imagine practicing that one. I would think that would be, if you did pad it up, you just go for it and trust it. That's a heck of a fall to take.
I mean, you could rehearse things, like that 15 times and still have something go wrong.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
With equipment or whatever.
Right.
So it's.
What is your take on the merger between UFC and WWE?
I think it'd be cool. I mean, look at some of the guys that they've got. Obviously Conor McGregor, and then the other guy's name slips me right now. I'm a big UFC fan too. I can't believe I slipped the guy's name. And I can picture him, Colby Covington. I think that's his name.
Okay.
Just the guys. Is it Colby Covington? He's the Trump guy, and he always gets everybody fired up and everything. But Derek Lewis. I mean, UFC. I could see more transition from WWE coming over to, UFC coming over to WWE than I could vice versa. There's obviously some guys that, they just cut loose of a guy that was a for real shoot wrestling hammer. Like Dolph Ziggler was the real deal. there's some guys in WWE that would be a handful for anybody, but there's some big personalities on the UFC side that whenever their fighting careers are done, I can see them moving over to WWE and extending their life.
And it's got to be hard too, because like, you know, with WWE, like everything's written out, and they have writers that write these storylines. And I don't really follow UFC, but from what little bits I do see, when you see like two guys getting ready and like they're hyping it up for a fight, like they almost look like they legitimately like hate each other. Like it doesn't seem like it's written out. I've seen some segments where two guys really don't like each other and they can't wait to beat the crap out of each other when they get in the cage. You know, I don't know how it works exactly. You know,
sometimes it's like that, but I mean, like with coming with that from that being my background, I mean, if you let someone in a real fight situation start emotionally controlling you, a lot of times you've lost, because it's just a lot. There's a lot that comes along with losing control of your emotion.
And especially too when you got UFC guys, like for example, let's say Shayna Baszler, she's one of the female ones that was in UFC along with Ronda Rousey. It's got to be really hard, especially when you're trained in UFC, to physically grapple people and actually try to really make them tap out. And then we're in WWE, when you do it, they're not really tapping them out. They're doing it in a way so it looks real. So it's got to be hard to control that, because like you're used to really hitting somebody in UFC versus going to WWE, where it's all more or less how you shoot the camera angle to get it to look authentic.
Well, but then there's also the part where if you've got someone that can really reach out and touch you with a real punch, they can pull just enough off of it to make it look really good. That's like what's the girl's name? Asuka.
Yep.
I always appreciated watching her, that because there's things like you can tell that she's got a real grappling background, because some of the mistakes that a lot of pro wrestlers will make with like if they're going for a rear naked choke, they've got somebody from behind and they wrap their legs around. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is if you're trying to sink the choke in, is to wrap your legs around and cross your ankles, because it gives yourself up for a really easy counter for the person that's in the choke to bring their legs over the top and cross their legs and pop their hips. And it basically, if you're the person applying the choke, you've put yourself in an ankle lock. And so those are the little things that for me always pop me, because Asuka's always caught those little cues, and like she doesn't cross her ankles, and she's always done the things that were fundamentally correct, the way like a Shayna Baszler or Ronda Rousey would. And those are things that I appreciate. I don't know if a lot of pro wrestling fans would appreciate them, but I know that I do, because I can see that she's actually got a background in it.
I mean, I like a lot of the more like the high flying guys, like say like Ricochet, for example. He's like one of those guys where it's just like he knows his limits, but he can just look at an area and just be like, all right, I'm going to go from here and jump here and onto him. Like one day he just pulled it out of his pocket where like they were all outside the ring. He went from one corner, ran to the second corner across from the ring, went up and got on top of the pole from down facing the corner, and did some sort of flip out to the outer ring. And it was just like came to mind just as he was ready to do it. You know what I mean? It was just not thinking about it.
Yeah, and I mean, like, he's an amazing athlete. The thing I've liked about him since he's come into WWE is like in the past, some of the guys that are able to do those amazing feats, they weren't so much. They were more concerned with I don't want to call it an acrobatic, but like they were more concerned with the athletic feat than how that particular thing fit within the confines of a storyline that they were telling within a match. And I think that's one of the cool things about watching him evolve through his time with WWE, is that he's able to do these amazing things, but then at the same time, they've been able to help him to make them make sense why he would do those things. Because, I mean, like, I've personally always, because I can't do that. If you put a gun to my head, you'd have to kill me because I cannot do that. But like I've always looked at it like I grew up where, watching some of the guys in the old WWF, I could see where it was kind of cartoonish.
Mm-hmm.
But I would watch Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat, and I could see where I could honestly believe that those were two guys that were the best in the world at their sport, contesting for the top prize in their sport. And like I'll watch that match to this day to try to study it, and I've always still, every single time I've got to watch it once as a fan and then once to kind of like break it down and see what they're doing, because I just get so drawn in. And I can't even tell you, I mean, it's got to be in the hundreds for the amount of times I've watched that match now.
So it's like their body language telling the story, basically.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it's the top two athletes in that sport at that time going for it.
Oh yeah, you catch a Ricky Steamboat versus Ric Flair match. That's just poetry in motion right there. I mean,
and that sets the two different eras apart too. Like you said, in the '80s, you had the way they wrestled; their body language told the story. Where the '90s, it went from more or less not the body language, but more or less the objects telling the story. Stone Cold smashing beers across his head.
Yeah, right.
Chair shots to the face, garbage can lids everywhere.
Right.
It went from the body language to the physical items telling you the story and how they could free ball on the mic, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's the thing too. Like, I mean, and I get it. Like, whenever you get to a point, everything's a job, and you're doing, you're doing what you're told to do to maintain that job, because those positions pay very well. But there's just a lot of guys that I wish that they would be given the freedom to just embrace their character and speak as their character. And I think you get a lot more heartfelt promos out of guys. I mean, I personally know guys that are like super witty and have tons of personality and can cut really good promos and could say things that are very heartfelt and would emotionally pull the audience in. But they're handed a script, and at the end of the day they're handed that script, and this is what they do and this is what they say, but it's not something that individual would ever say in an actual real life setting.
They're into it for the job, but not into it because their physical character feels it. For like Rock and Stone Cold, like they weren't really given a script. They were like, okay, I want you to go after him and then lead it up to this pay-per-view. And they would literally just get handed the mic, and whatever they could come up with to get it rolling, it just clicked with each other,
Yeah, and I think a lot of those guys would just want to be handed the ball. Just give them the ball and let them run the ball. And if they don't run the ball and they don't do well, then I think a lot of them would be willing to bet on it and bet on themselves. I mean, a lot of those guys, they make it there to that point because at some point in time they were willing to bet on themselves.
Yeah.
Well, as a man who's trained in martial arts, such as yourself, I know you can take care of yourself. I'm be willing to surmise you can. Have you ever had the problem of somebody trying to go into business for themselves in a match with you?
Yeah, one time in particular I think of. Just a dude that was kind of a bully, and what made me mad about it was he was a good bit taller than I am, and I don't do them anymore, but I guess I can still pull one out of the bag. But I used to throw like really nice drop kicks, and I threw a drop kick, caught the guy just flush in the chest and everything. And like I said, he was a good bit taller than I am, and so like I'm thinking about it on the way down. I'm like, that was a really sweet drop kick. And then I turn around and this dude's just like kind of like doing like Andre would do and adjusting his trunks and everything, and it flew all over me. And I remember standing there looking at him, and I just lost it. I said, "Oh, okay, so you're just gonna no sell me?" And so as soon as I did, I kicked him in the gut, and he grabs me in a headlock and punched me. We ended up tumbling out of the ring, and so like I hooked him in a guillotine choke and started punching him. And I was supposed to be the baby face, and like through that, I remember hitting him a few times and just telling him I was tired of it because he had bullied me and a few other guys, just because he thought he could get away with it being bigger. And it was funny, of all things, it was not a quit match. And I asked him, I said, all right, well, you think you can do the right thing now? And he said, yeah. And I said, all right, run my back into the side of the ring, cut me off. And so like he does that, and we go back into the ring. And but I think he was kind of freaked out, like most bullies are. And so I ended up looking like the heel because he wouldn't really do much the rest of the match. But yeah, that was the one time that I think that might have been the only time that ever happened to me.
Now, let me ask you, and there's a lot of professional wrestlers out there, both independent and on the main stage, who have had basically injuries and are basically, if crippled, if they're in their 50s or 60s.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prevent yourself from going down that path of being, crippled, or something like that? Is there something that you prepare for, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the old saying, a body in motion stays in motion. I just try to keep myself in the best shape that I can. I've had a lot of injuries. I've torn both of my biceps. I've torn meniscus in my left knee, tricep in my left arm. That's the only surgery that I've required. Messed my neck up, my back, concussions, broken the hand and junk like that. But it's just always trying to stay in the best shape that you possibly can. And then as I get older, just kind of, knowing my limits. And whenever I was younger, not really necessarily saying, no, I don't think that's something that suits me. Whenever, you're talking through and calling a match. Now I'll try to take what an opponent does and the things that he does well, and trying to match them up to things that I can do, so that we're able to each do our best performance, but at the same time, each of us walk out of the ring safe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I ran into this situation, and it took the guy back. I'm not going to name no names, but had this guy come in, pretty popular guy at the time, and he was wrestling a younger guy, but a guy that was over in that area, and the younger guy goes, "What can I do to make you look good? How can I help you make this match look good?" And that main event guy just kind of was just taken back. He said nobody's ever said that before.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that statement?
From which side, the younger guy or the older guy?
The older guy, the guy that's been to, he was in WCW.
Okay. I mean, if I were the older guy, I'd be flattered by that the younger guy had the head about him, that he wasn't just there to, get his stuff in. He was there to work for what was best for the match, both guys in the match, and to entertain the crowd. I don't know, obviously I don't know the experience level of the younger guy, but that speaks a lot of him and the people that coached him, that it wasn't about it wasn't about he, it was about we. And he was concerned with that. I think that speaks volumes for him, that he was more willing to look at what the abilities of himself and his partner for the night were, rather than just what he thought the cool thing he could do would be.
Now I've got another question for you. What do you think when you hear a 10, 11, 12-year-old, want to be a professional wrestler? What does that do to you? I mean, do you dissuade them or do you encourage them? How
No, I would encourage them. I mean, man, it's a dream. Like, think about it. So there's so many people that want to do that. You look at what does WWE draw on an average night for whatever a full packed house is, from Monday Night Raw all the way to WrestleMania. I mean, whatever the average of that would be. And I would venture to say that, like, most all of the people in that audience at some level have dreamed of being the person that's in the ring that they've paid to see. And I mean, if you push and you go for it and it doesn't work out, at least you can always say that, you tried it, your best effort, and at whatever point you hit your limit. I would never dissuade anyone from doing that, because honestly, there's things that, like, early on, like, I left on that I wish I would have done differently, but I mean, they are what they are now. So yeah, I would never dissuade someone younger from wanting to do that.
Okay. Andy, you got anything?
So you seem like, obviously, by what I've been hearing, you're more of like the old school type wrestling, more of the grapple style wrestling. And what is your take on, like, let's just say like a company like Combat Zone Wrestling, who uses nothing but like weapons, and basically it's a plethora of just different household items.
So that kind of thing, like, I'm not against that. If it's something to where, like, you and I had been doing something, and we had I'm the heel and you're the baby face, whatever. And we had a match, and you're close to getting up on me, and I do something to get disqualified. And then we come back and we do another match, and we've done a time limit draw. And then we come back and we do a third match, and me and Nikita hits the ring, and you get whacked with the signal, and the referee's down, and I cover you, and another referee slides in and gives the pin, or the referee wakes up and gives the pin, whatever. And then they put us inside of a cage, and you're allowed to use all these weapons. That, I think, is awesome. Built a story, and you built to the point that these two guys have so much tension between them that the only way you're going to settle that is through a match to extremes, that you have to do these things. And that, I think, is great. The thing that I don't particularly care for is if, like, you and I are booked at that place, and the first night we show up, they're like, all right, you guys are going to go out there, and you've got barbed wire and glass tubes and tables. And I'm like, man, why am I mad enough at you to hit you with that? Because this guy's going to pay me this, or why am I that mad? Because, like, that's the thing that's never made sense to me.
I mean, because a lot of people, some people like it from the creativity aspect of how they can utilize the different light tubes and weapons. Some people
what's creative about it? That I can get a light tube in the head, or because I can put on an athletic performance?
Like some of the videos I've seen where they've been able to create, like, different setups, like how they create the setup, not necessarily the item. Like for instance, one video I remember watching, it was a bunch of light tubes, but they were all taped together in the form of like a ladder, and then the guy went through them like a layer of tables. Like, and some people consider that what they used to consider ECW, which was garbage wrestling. I know over in Japan, stuff like that is really hot in some aspects. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know they used to use, almost looks like shish kebab skewers you used to see, like, and they're putting them in each other's forehead. I don't really understand that kind of aspect, but I just like seeing the creativity of like how you can just take a table and a trash can and use it to the full extent that you can use it to.
Some of that kind of stuff, whenever there's not a story behind it, I think you might as well grab a lawn chair and a case of beer and sit on the side of the interstate and wait on wrecks. That's what it seems like to me. It's human car wrecks.
Basically, Andy, I think what Alexander is saying is, if it's like a built up to a final match, where you have, in other words, if he is wrestling another person, and somebody or a group of people come in and just jump him, and because he pinned somebody in a I guess in an unconventional way or something. I don't know. And what had happened is his character turns from heel to baby face to deal with this situation, and they have several matches. It may just be a standard match that double DQ. They fall out of the ring, whatever, and then it builds up after maybe 3 or 4 matches until, okay, we've got to put these guys in a cage match, because there's no way the arena can contain them. In other words, it's a cherry on top of a wrestling.
It's not just the ring's full of stuff. Here you go at it, start beating the hell out of each other.
Andy, go back and watch. It's on the Peacock Network. Watch some of the war game, like the Crockett War Games pay-per-views. But before you watch that, go back and watch the I think it was called WCW Saturday Night, but go back and watch the things that led up to that, where like you had the Horsemen against the Road Warriors, Lex Luger, and I think Barry Windham was one of their other teammates. But watch what they built up to that. The Horsemen had ran roughshod over these baby faces for nearly a year, and then they get this opportunity that they're all locked into a cage. It's all a team. It's 2 rings, 1 big cage, and they're just beating the brakes off the heels, because the heels couldn't have their buddies all jump in at the same time. They couldn't do, that's what the cage was for, was to keep that outside interference, from being able to take place. And that's what the beauty of it was. The cool, Jim, you were talking about West Georgia. One of the greatest things I'll ever get to do was at Peach State, and I wrestled. His name slipped. Johnny. He's in Impact now.
Johnny Swinger.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, Johnny Swinger.
I had to think.
And so I was the NWA Georgia champion. Johnny was the Peach State Heritage champion, and we went into a cage together. And so we're in there and we're doing the match, and it's like we go back and forth. The cage was never touched until the very end. Johnny goes to run my head into the cage. I grab his at the last second. We both eat the cage and we're down. And so the referee's counting us, and he's looking at us, and we're both trying to pull ourselves up. And Johnny's close to the door, and my manager at the time was near the door, and he walked on a cane. And so the referee looks over at me at 8. He counts 8. He looks over at Johnny and he counts 9. He looks over at me and I'm standing up. My manager reaches through the door, hooks Johnny's foot with the cane, pulls it. Johnny falls down, and the referee looks back over and counts 10 on Johnny. I'm standing, so I'm the new champion. That place went so nuts that we had to stay inside the cage until they could get control of it. It was the greatest feeling. It's a stupid thing to say that you're so excited over that you've made a room full of, a few hundred people that want to get inside of a cage with you to beat the brakes off of you. But it was just awesome because we had told a story and the people were that emotionally involved that they wanted to get in and lay hands on us because of that. And I remember the referee coming to me and he goes, "You've got to get out." And I was like, "I'm not getting out of here." And he goes, "Well, Johnny's in here." I said, "Tell Johnny to get out." Nobody's mad at Johnny. And I just stayed in the cage until they got control of it because I thought, all right, I stand a pretty good chance of punching anybody that can come over the top of this cage. I get outside this cage, I'm on my own. Well, and so once they kind of got control of it, they opened the door and I made a break for the locker room and it was okay. But, but then there's been the flip side of it too, where I've been the heel and I've done all these things. And then, you end up in a cage and it's your time that, you can't pull any more of those stunts because they're not available and you get your butt whipped all over a cage.
Well, that's what I was saying. CZW is known for, like you said, like I was saying, a lot of carnage. And they do stuff that seems really kind of unrealistic in what you would ever see in a wrestling match. Like, for example, they would put buckets of salt at each corner of the ring. So by the time they're all bloodied up, being hit with light tubes, they start throwing salt at each other. To, you know what I mean?
Weed eaters.
Yeah, weed eaters and, cheese graters to the forehead. I've seen kids wiffle ball bats rolled in thumbtacks.
The only time I was going to go there, Jimmy Rave called me and asked about if I wanted to go to CZW with him. And first I was like, no. I said, I don't want to go up there and get hit with a weed eater, man. That doesn't sound like fun. And he goes, no, we'll be the wrestling match. And I was like, yeah, if it's you and I and we're the wrestling match, then yeah, I'll do it. But no, I'm not wanting to go up there and all the stuff you just said. I don't want to go up there and take part in that.
I mean, they do it. The only thing I really like that they do is they utilize the 2-ring system a lot, especially with a cage going around both rings. Mm-hmm. I do like that aspect. I mean, the weapons can get a little bit gory. I just like seeing what they can do with having 2 rings and be able to utilize all the aspects of having that much room. You know what I mean?
Go back to War Games. Watch True. War Games. Interesting thing, Alexander. You were talking about your situation in Peach State that you had in the cage. Well, another one happened. Matter of fact, it's on YouTube. Happened to a gentleman who attacked Dusty Rhodes with Ole Anderson and the Assassins, and they didn't want to get out of the cage either. It was a wrestler named Ivan Koloff. So history kind of repeats itself in that, and it's kind of ironic if you think about it.
Oh yeah. I love the story of Ivan, where whenever he defeated Bruno Sammartino for the WWF title, Ivan's move was the knee drop off the top rope, and when he hit Bruno with that and covered him for the pin, the arena was so silent that Bruno thought that he had lost his hearing until it hit 3, and then there was a pause and just the big explosion of the arena. And that's a cool feeling too. Whenever you've done something and, a lot of people equate a crowd silence to that they didn't react. But whenever you get that pause and you can tell it's just that pregnant pause of silence where they're stunned with the finish, and then you get their reaction, that's an awesome feeling. No, there's nothing in the world that'll match it.
No, that actually happened in the Omni in Atlanta, of all places, and seeing that you're from Georgia, I take it.
Mm-hmm.
You should be familiar with the Omni.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did want I did want to ask you, what do you think of the current situation with the independent promotions out there?
In Georgia.
Well, I mean, not just Georgia. I mean, Tennessee. I mean, there's some in West Virginia and everything. You had made mentioned you worked for a Hope Championship Wrestling. As a matter of
Hmm.
fact, the last interview I did, because Andy wasn't here at the time, was with a referee, James Lawrence.
Okay.
And he was talking about George South and his promotion there. What do you think about the independent promotions? Do you think it has taken over for the territories, since WWF can't be in like all places at once?
Um, in some ways, yeah. Um, I wish that a lot of them would work together more, just because I think at times it would be better for everyone. Uh, I mean, selfishly, I wish that, and I'm guilty of it too. So whenever I'm pointing one finger, I've got three aimed back at me. Um, I think sometimes guys dilute themselves by working too much in a certain area for different promotions, because you can take away from what's special about you if you know, to where fans are really big on you. If they can see you this weekend, but if it's not convenient, then well, you'll be at this place just down the road the next weekend. Um, I think it's not as special then. Uh, but I mean, I think there's a lot of them that do. There's some of them that are really bad with letting guys that I'm big on. You don't have to be a bodybuilder. You can be a big guy, like all shapes and sizes. There can be some smaller guys if they're in shape. Um, but like I'm big on that. Like you need to be the part and look the part. But then there's just some promotions that they'll just put anybody in a ring that's willing to get into a ring, and like I particularly just cannot stand that, because I think it's insulting to the guys that have put the time in to work and really train to become good at what they do. Um, and I always look at it like like I grew up as a wrestling fan. So if I weren't in wrestling and I wanted to take one of my kids to see a wrestling event, and I showed up and some of the guys like what I'm talking about that don't portray the part correctly are in the ring. Well, if that's your first exposure to anything that's not the WWE, AEW, NWA, Ring of Honor, New Japan, whatever, um, it's going to be a huge turnoff. And I don't think that's fair to a lot of the guys that put the time and the work in to really be able to hold their own with anybody anywhere.
Well, speaking of kids, uh, let me say this: a lot of wrestlers who have kids do not take their kids to the events.
Mm.
Um, have you taken your kids to the events?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
My so all of my daughters have been at least once to see me perform. Um, I've taken my oldest son with me several times. Now my youngest son, I mean, he comes along with me pretty much anytime I'm within driving distance. But I mean, and that's kind of like my measuring stick too. Like if I don't, if I don't feel like I could take my wife or one of my kids along with me to a show that I'm on, that I don't need to be on it. And I mean, I've just kind of reached that point in my life that my faith and what my family means to me, that means way more to me than what a promoter's going to pay me for an evening.
well, um, how do you keep that? How do you keep that backstage, you know, kayfabe to your children? Do you do so?
Yeah. I mean, to an extent. Um, I've let my son understand that, because there's one guy that's a really good friend of mine, and we've had a ton of matches together, and um, he's honestly my favorite person to be in a ring with. And my youngest son couldn't stand him for the longest time just because of that.
Yeah.
Uh, but after a while, he just, he kind of caught on and saw what it was, and then, but at the same time, he's been there with me whenever it was just a show that we had traveled to, and the guy that I was working with, I was just going to be the guy that I worked with for that night, and we may or may not ever see him again. um and so like he kind of understands what the deal is.
So, I have another question. So,
Go right ahead.
if you one of your let's just say one of your kids came up to you and said, "I want to wrestle," I mean, how would you feel about that? Like, for an example, I know like Mick Foley did an interview where his daughter wanted to wrestle, and he was against her training and didn't want her in the ring because he didn't want her to go through and end up down the path like he did to get to where he was. Like, Mick Foley literally beat the crap out of his body to make a name of himself. So, I mean, how would you, like, obviously you've done a lot of this stuff, and obviously if one of your kids wanted to do it, you would be able to kind of guide them in the way of, these are the do's, these are the don'ts, this is what you want to focus on. I mean, what would your take out be on that if one of your kids said, "I want to get in the ring"? Especially if you went through a lot of things like Mick Foley where, you lost an ear, or you've broken almost every body in your bone or every bone in your body, excuse me,
Right.
trying to get, somewhere to make a name for yourself.
Well, I mean, I look at it like, because my parents always wanted me to kind of play it safe, and that kind of, I guess, to have that dream wasn't really encouraged. So if one of my kids, if that was their dream and everything, I mean, I feel blessed that through my time, I've been able to make the connections that would be able to help them and give them more of an advantage, and having the connections, and then through my own experiences with the training and everything, and to be able to coach them up, I would hope that I would be able to give them the opportunities to give them a leg up. And so, I mean, I would never discourage it. My youngest son, he's in gymnastics now, and like he always talks about his favorite wrestler aside from me, which I was flattering, is AJ Styles. And I think he's on my top 5 of all time. So if he were ever able to, do something like that, I would encourage him to do it. I think, where, some of my friends that have made it didn't have a B plan. And I think there's a delicate balance between, you got to sell out, and that's got to be your entire plan, to make it in this industry. And I feel like at times that's where I pulled up a little short, was not completely selling out to it. I also believe, though, that having that B plan and having a backup for, because sometimes you're either gonna run out of athletic ability, or injuries happen, and it's just gonna change your course.
Well, seems like your son has a good taste in wrestlers. I like AJ too. Personally, I like the older AJ from TNA. The more high flyer AJ, I prefer that version compared to now. But
gosh, man, well, he still can do it. That dude can have the best matches ever with anybody in the world, and he's a good guy. Like that's what I think so good about him is he's a great person to be around, and I mean, he's been the top of every single company that he's ever been in. And so whenever you're looking at a guy to be on a Mount Rushmore of who's who, I can't imagine why he doesn't get talked about that more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean,
Believe it or not, he started in CZW too. That was one of his first promotions. Or one of the first promotions when he started his career.
Yeah, he started here in Georgia at NWA
he
Anarchy.
started with NWA Anarchy, or Wildside is what it was called at the
Right.
time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Wildside. Yeah.
And before we let you go, Alexander, we're gonna do something. I'm gonna take 5 wrestlers. Andy, you take 5 wrestlers. Past or present, mainstay wrestlers, and give me your honest opinion, Alexander. First, almost like a word association. Your honest opinion of the wrestlers, what's your take on them, and what you think about them. Okay? I'm going to go first with the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
Oh gosh. One of the most charismatic guys ever to be in the ring. A guy that was the epitome of, you didn't have to be a body guy. His charisma was just larger than life. Such a smart person, did so much for so many others, for putting them over and being smart enough to always keep himself in really good positions.
Eddie?
I'm gonna go. I'm a '90s guy, so I'm gonna go with one here that never really got a lot of recognition. But how about Steve Blackman, mixed martial arts?
Oh yeah, Steve Blackman was cool. I always liked that he was like a really jacked dude, and then he had a cool karate gimmick. The only thing that I ever remember really sticking out to him was like he looked cool and he had a cool gimmick, but he didn't have a lot of personality that really would draw you to him.
He looked like more like a guy you would have found at like the mall security kind of thing, like nightclub, like bouncer.
Yeah. The dude
with a karate
the
background.
dude you didn't want to mess with wherever you ran into it.
I guess my next guy I'm going to go with, and this is a guy that was kind of popular in the 70s, Mr. Wrestling number 2.
Oh, yeah. So like he was a guy that like he actually met him in 2012 or 13 at the Cauliflower Alley, and like he was a guy that he kept things. I don't know if simple is the right word or not. Nothing super flashy, but he just had a lot of character about himself and the way he carried himself, and like that big knee. That was always the thing. Like you knew that if he was able to hit the big knee, you could cancel Christmas. That I was a fan of him, watching him.
Funny story behind that. He was actually at a show I was at, and it was the main event. And at the end, he went in and did that high knee lift. And when he did, it sounded like a bullwhip going off, and the guy was laying in the ring that he did it to, and everybody was getting up and congratulating him as he got out of the ring. And I looked over at the guy laying there, and he goes, just feeling his jaw, because it must have legit smacked him.
I remember, so like whenever I got to meet him, they had me bring the NWA Georgia title to present it to the guy that was the head of the NWA at the time, and Mr. Wrestling 2 was there and showing him the belt and everything, and talking with him about his time as the champion and everything. That was just so cool, hearing him talk about it, and then to realize that I got to be named in the lineage of something that guys like him, himself, he was a part of. I remember doing an interview leading up to the one opportunity I got at the NWA World Title, and they named the list of the NWA Georgia champions, and it froze me in the interview just because I got to listen to the lineage of that title and to hear my name on it. And then whenever they, announced me as being the longest reigning one, it was just amazing to get to be, I even spoken in the same air as some of those guys.
Yeah, I believe he, off the top of my head, he was a 12-time Georgia heavyweight champion.
Sounds about right.
Okay, Andy, it's your turn.
This was more of a gimmick than I guess it was a wrestler, but how about Gilbert?
He's actually a good guy. I've done a couple of shows with him and everything.
I think he came into the picture because he was just kind of showing up at like every show, and he looked like Goldberg, but he was just scrawny with no muscles, So it kind of ran.
Well, that's a good example of being there and being what they need at the right time. I remember the first time I was ever on a show with him, and I was always kind of the guy that got paired up with the quote unquote name guy, and some of the guys in the locker room coming to me and they were like, "Are you working with Gilbert?" And I was like, "No." And they were like, "Well, don't you want to?" And I was like, "Well, not for nothing or nothing against him, not really." I was like, "It's nothing against him, but it's not going to help me out any to be putting over Gilbert."
Now, here's one for you. Well, it's actually two. It's a tag team. The Road Warriors.
Oh, good Lord. So I never got to meet Hawk. I did get to meet Animal. And one thing I think is cool is Nikita played football with both of those guys. And he and Animal were really close whenever they met in high school and then played college football together. And I got the opportunity to be around Animal a couple times. And he was just, a really good guy. But then watching them as a kid and everything, they were just so cool. Like every single thing they went through. I mean, they looked different than everybody else. They were bigger at a time where some of the guys were still just kind of that bulky big, and the Road Warriors were like merging into the bodybuilder size guys. I mean, they were it whenever I was a kid. And I remember like the as heels, whenever they I don't remember if it was Hawk or Animal, unscrewed the spike from their shoulder pads and stuck it in Dusty Rhodes' eye. Like, I still remember that. I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I remember that like it was yesterday.
That actually got Dusty fired because that was his spot that he had planned.
Oh, yeah, because that was when
why
he went trying to move away from some of the blood and everything.
Right, and that's why. Funny thing about them is there was a tour that I don't know, Matt Cardona, Zack Ryder, was over in Japan, and he went to this wrestling store over there that in Tokyo, and believe it or not, the Road Warriors are still considered iconic over in Japan.
Oh, I bet.
Okay, I forgot who. Oh, okay, it's your turn, Andy.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. I'm going to go a little bit of ruthless aggression era here. It's a little bit older, newer, whatever you want to call it. About Billy Kidman. He used to be one I really liked. I never really got a lot of recognition. He was more one of the high flyers.
Yeah, I remember him. He was wasn't he one of the first people that was it Stacy Keibler that was hooked up with him?
Something like that. He was known for doing what they called the shooting star press, which was basically jumping all the ring ropes and doing a backflip, throwing your body forward.
Yeah, I just remember him being like one of the guys. I say a smaller guy. He's probably because he was kind of still in that land of the Titans. He's probably a big guy. He was just amongst giants. But yeah, I remember that, him being like a guy that looked quote unquote undersized, but finding a way to, make what he did work amongst the guys that were bigger. Really good cruiserweight matches.
Okay, here's one for you. I'm gonna throw a big one out. The Nature Boy Ric Flair.
Oh God, the GOAT. I mean, like, that's my guy. Like, watching him and his matches with Nikita, where like Flair could be the heel one week, and then you just pair him up with the right guy, and he's the baby face the next. His matches with Nikita and Dusty Rhodes, and his matches with Ricky Steamboat are my favorite of all time. But he was it for me. Like, I remember, like, that was one of my first memories of wrestling, was watching Flair do his promos on Saturday night at 6:05. And my grandfather hated his guts to the point.
Mine too.
Oh my Lord! To the point that, like, I didn't even want to tell my grandfather that I thought Ric Flair was cool, because like he'd call Ric Flair everything but a child of God, and like I still watch some of his matches and everything, because a lot of people say, oh, well, Flair was repetitive and this, that, and the other, and they'll compare him to some of the things that Hogan did. But like, Hogan was working in one region with guys that Vince McMahon had hand selected from around the country because of their talent. Flair had to go out, and it didn't matter if it was Ricky Steamboat or Joe Blow Billy Bob. Ric Flair's job was to make that dude wrestle for an hour most every night of the week and look like he came within an inch of beating the world champion. And that's why, like, growing up, the NWA was always my thing, and I loved watching it, because to me, like, Flair always represented that. He represented what would have been the best professional wrestler in the world to me. And the robes, the flash, all that. Like, I think he's the best.
Interesting story behind that. Flair once asked Cena to break his streak, break his record, because both of them are at 16. And
well, Flair's at 16 according to the WWE's count. If you go according to the real count, it's 21 to 23.
But Cena refused. He absolutely refused to break that record.
I could see that.
He said, no disrespect, but you held that for several years. There's no way in the world I'm going to break it.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, you got one for him?
Yeah, let's go to WCW route. How about Diamond Dallas Page? Because you look like you have that same facial features.
That's a first. I've never been told that.
But you kind of have the same kind of voice too, almost.
Yeah, I could see. I think he's a cool guy. I mean, I've only been around him a couple times at a distance, and he was always a really cool guy. But I think it was cool. Like, he was another dude that, like, he got in and he was a manager, and he wouldn't accept no. Like, he had been told that, because I want to say they told him he was too old to move into the wrestling side of it, and he just wouldn't accept that. And he was always working down at the power plant and making himself better, and he ended up, he worked himself into being the world champion and performing very well. And then now in his latter stages, he's he's helped. I mean, it's amazing some of the things he's done to help people turn their lives around and find a health at a point that they didn't think they could find it. I think he's a great person.
I can remember like it was yesterday. It's not a good thing, or it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. That's what one of his little catch lines he always used to say to everybody.
Okay, my final fifth one, Roman Reigns.
Oh, he's awesome. Like, now that they're not trying to shove him down everybody's throat as a baby face and letting him be him, I think he's a guy that he shows that they're kind of giving him the freedom, or no pun intended, they're giving him the reins to be who he is and comfortable as a character. I think it's awesome. The only thing I don't really like that they've done with him is I think it's stupid to have created a world. What's the new one?
It's the new world heavyweight belt.
World heavyweight title. Like, I think it would have been a better idea to create the world heavyweight title, put that on Roman. If you're going to have a Raw and SmackDown title, split them back up, put one on each brand, and then Roman bounces in between, and whoever's the number one contender, he defends against that person at that time, rather than putting two titles on Roman, calling it the undisputed heavyweight world or whatever they call it, undisputed championship, and then making a world heavyweight title. Well, it's not undisputed if within the same company you've got two world champions. But like, he's a dude that, like, I love what they're doing with him. He's special. And now that they're not showcasing him all the time, they're getting back to where whenever he's on a show, it's special. And he's the kind of athlete that it's special to get to see him. You don't have a handful of Roman Reigns. You've got, one.
The hard part with that is that I think they can't come up with a higher ranking type of title or name for a title. I mean, like back in the day, you had your world heavyweight champion, then you had your undisputed champion, and then you had your unified champion. And the problem is they can't come up with a name that sounds bigger and badder than a universal champion.
I mean, this is my stupid wrestler brain. If I were doing it, I would have the world heavyweight champion, and that would be Roman. And then on the Raw side, you'd have the United States champion, and that could be Seth Rollins. And then on the SmackDown side, you could have Gunther, let him be the Intercontinental champion. And it would be kind of like back in the old territory thing where you would have with the NWA, you'd have the world champion, you'd have the United States champion, you'd have the national champion. And the whole point of those titles were, except for the few major cards a year, you would have Ric Flair in a city, he'd be defending the world title. You'd have Magnum TA or Nikita Koloff in a city, they would be the top of the card with the United States title. And then in another city, you'd have like a Tully Blanchard, and he'd have the national title. And that was the whole point of those things. They'd run 3 different cities, and they would have a title at the top of each card. And then a few times a year, they would come together, and all those titles would be defended, or the United States champion or the national champion would contest for the world title. And that's how I would split it. I think it takes credit away from a title whenever you've got several world champions. And I think that would be cool. I mean, that was the thing that I always thought was cool about whenever I had the opportunity to be the NWA North American champion was, I was the guy right below the world champion. And, and that was my job, was to bring attention to the NWA on cards that the world champion wasn't able to be at the time.
Well, interestingly enough, in that addendum, and I know, Andy, you got one more. In that addendum, that's what they did with the Georgia title, the Georgia heavyweight title, is he would travel around the states. But
right.
Back in Georgia Championship Wrestling days, they had a promoter that was part of Georgia Championship Wrestling named Fred Ward.
Mm-hmm.
He ran Columbus and Macon,
Mm-hmm.
and he would have a city champion, such as there. And you can actually look it up. There was a NWA Columbus heavyweight champion and an
Right.
NWA Macon heavyweight champion. That I remember. But back then, in the Georgia Championship Wrestling days, everybody had a championship belt.
Mm-hmm.
I literally saw a show, it was on YouTube, where you had the World Tag Team Champions, United States Tag Team Champions, and the State Tag Team Champions, the Georgia Tag Team Champions, on one show.
Yeah, and see, I mean, I think to a point, like, that gets to be too much. If there's a promotion that I've worked for a good bit out in Texas, that, like, I was looking at one of their flyers the other day, and everybody was some sort of a champion. And it's almost like in our society now where everybody gets a trophy. If everybody's a champion, there's nothing special about being the champion. I think you need a main champion and a mid card to intermediate champion, and then I like the idea of tag team champions. But like when you come up with like what you just said, I mean, if you're going to see those people week in and week out, there's nothing special about it.
And nowadays you have AEW has the trios champion, so it's not just two anymore.
I don't get that.
Andy, your final wrestler.
I'm gonna go with, because I would be interested to see what your take would be if he was still with us, is Owen Hart. Where do you think he would be at today if he was still alive? Because he was a good wrestler back in the '90s, but I don't think he was appreciated, as much as, like, say, Bret Hart or
Yeah, he definitely wasn't. I definitely think he wasn't appreciated for his abilities. I think he had more character than Bret did. He was like the annoying little brother that took advantage of being younger and knowing that he was younger. By now, I would think he would still be contributing. Like, is that what you're asking? Is like, what would he be doing today?
Like, what would he be doing, or where do you think he would have ended up in the end of his career? Like, do you think he would have been like Bret Hart, where he was, kind of got screwed out and pushed away, or kept fulfilling his full career and ended up being, a multi-time big champion, or maybe things would have worked out differently with Bret Hart had he still been around, because they would have been a tag team.
Yeah, I mean, I could see all those things. I could see Owen making it to be a world champion, or like you said, doing some things with Bret as a tag team. I definitely think if he were around today, it would have been foolish to not have him contributing as an agent in some form, because like, caught on as we've been talking that you're into more of the high flying type of wrestling. And Owen was certainly capable of doing that. But at the same time, Owen could get out and wrestle a guy like Bret that was more of a technician and a ground-based wrestler. And Owen could, certainly have really good matches with people like that. So, I mean, at this point in time, like today, if he were still around, I think he'd be an asset to any one of the large companies as an agent to coach up the younger people coming along and like what we were talking about earlier, make the stories they're telling in the ring make sense.
Well, Alexander, I want to thank you for coming on the show. My closing thoughts are this: I feel like that your uncle's most iconic matches were his best of 7 with Magnum.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that they dropped the ball by not making him a world champion.
Yeah, I do too.
well, hopefully one day we will see you as a world champion.
I appreciate that.
Andy, you want to add anything before we get out of here?
I think you pretty much covered it all, Jim. Appreciate your time. I know, obviously, you got kids, so you got a busy schedule around outside of wrestling too. But and we don't. Of course, we can talk all night, but we don't want to keep you all night because you have adulting.
I appreciate it. I've enjoyed this.
Before we leave, where can people see you wrestle at currently?
Okay, so October 7th, I'll be in Sylvan, North Carolina for Heroes Legends Wrestling. October 14th, I'll be in Forsyth, Georgia for Wrestle America. October 21st and 22nd, I'll be wrestling for Hope Championship Wrestling in Thomaston, Georgia. And December 2nd, I'll be in Dublin, Georgia for Lariato Wrestling. And late November around Thanksgiving, I'll be at WrestleCade.
All right.
You got a full palette.
Yeah.
Very full. Very full.
Sometimes I feel like I'm not smart enough to read a calendar and give myself time off.
Well, Alexander, I want to thank you for this time. When we go off the air, I want to thank you properly before we go off the air for your time. We greatly appreciate this, ladies and gentlemen. If you're in the area to see Aleksadr Koloff wrestle, go check him out. Although he is a heel, chances are, if you can get word to him that you saw him on this podcast, I'm sure he'll be more than happy to at least give you a grunt or something.
Maybe. We'll see.
Maybe. Well, Andy, you want to take us out?
Yep. Thanks again, guys. If you would, hit the like, share, subscribe button. Hit the notification bell for the next show, and we'll see you for the next one.